I never thought I'd see the day when my own brother would be sitting across from my mahogany desk, hands trembling as he slid his resume toward me like some desperate job applicant. But here we are, Marcus Chen, former Stanford MBA graduate, former investment banking vice president at Goldman Sachs, former golden child of the Chen family, asking me for a position as my assistant. What happened 3 months ago still makes my heart race every time I think about it. And before I reveal the shocking truth that brought us to this moment, let me tell you exactly how the family financial prodigy ended up begging for my help. I'm Victoria Chen, 36 years old, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Meridian Software Solutions here in Austin, Texas. For the past 15 years, I've built my career in the shadows of my younger brother's seemingly endless achievements. While Marcus was collecting finance awards and perfect GMAT scores, I was the one quietly revolutionizing machine learning algorithms and building software platforms that now generate over $50 million annually for my company. But none of that ever seemed to matter to my parents. "Victoria's decent with computers," my mother would say with that dismissive wave of her hand at family gatherings. But Marcus, now there's our success story. Did you know he just closed a $200 million deal at Goldman Sachs? They're grooming him for managing director. The way her eyes would light up when discussing Marcus's achievements while barely acknowledging my own patents and industry recognition became a familiar knife twist that I learned to endure with forced smiles. Growing up in our affluent Palo Alto neighborhood, the Chen family reputation was built entirely on Marcus's financial acumen and Wall Street success. While other families bragged about their children's various accomplishments, our parents put all their social currency into their brilliant son who would conquer high finance, while their daughter just worked at some startup in Texas, doing what they considered lesser work despite my company's impressive growth. Have you ever lived your entire life feeling like you were invisible next to someone else's spotlight? I'd love to hear about your experiences, because what I discovered 3 months ago didn't just change my relationship with Marcus. It shattered everything I thought I knew about our family and exposed a deception so profound that it's still hard for me to believe it was real. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in my corner office on the 32nd floor of the Frost Bank Tower. Austin stretched out beneath me, the morning sun casting long shadows across the city that had become my sanctuary away from the suffocating expectations of my San Francisco family. I was reviewing the quarterly performance reports for my department, 47 of the most brilliant engineers in Texas, managing projects worth over $200 million in total value. My assistant, Jennifer, knocked and entered with my usual morning fuel, a double-shot espresso without milk, the same drink that had powered me through countless late nights developing the proprietary algorithms that had made Meridian one of the fastest-growing software companies in the Southwest. "Miss Chen, your mother called again about this Sunday's family dinner. She was very insistent that you attend because Marcus will be making a major announcement about his career." I suppressed the familiar eye roll. Another major announcement about Marcus, naturally. At 28, he'd already climbed the ranks at Goldman Sachs to become their youngest vice president, had his financial models featured in major industry publications, and was being headhunted by every elite investment firm on Wall Street. Meanwhile, despite holding 12 patents in artificial intelligence, building 3 successful software platforms from the ground up, and being featured on the cover of Tech Innovator magazine just last month, I was still the family member who did something with computers in Texas. What I didn't know as I sat in my office that morning, reviewing reports that would influence millions of dollars in technology investments, was that this Sunday dinner would become the catalyst for the most dramatic reversal of fortune our family had ever experienced. Hidden in my mother's mahogany desk drawer, buried beneath years of family documents and forgotten paperwork, was a manila envelope containing information so explosive that it would not only destroy Marcus's carefully constructed image, but reveal a deception that had shaped our entire family dynamic for over 2 decades. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me as I stared out at the Austin skyline, watching the morning traffic flow like digital data streams along the highways below. Here I was, managing technical operations that affected thousands of users worldwide, making strategic decisions that influenced multi-million-dollar product launches, and yet every family gathering felt like a performance review, where I perpetually received failing marks. Marcus was the Wall Street star, the financial genius, the one who would make millions in investment banking and bring honor to the Chen family name. I was just the daughter who happened to run a successful company in Texas. But computers, I was about to discover, have an uncanny ability to reveal truths that humans spend decades trying to conceal. And sometimes, the very technology you've devoted your life to mastering becomes the key that unlocks secrets you never knew existed. The document I'm referring to, the one that would change everything, contained digital records, timestamps, and metadata that painted a picture so different from our family's accepted narrative that it took me 3 days to fully process what I was seeing. Little did I realize that within 72 hours of that seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning, Marcus would be the one desperately calling me, pleading for my help, and the power dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood would be completely and irreversibly altered. The golden boy who had never needed anything from anyone would discover that his entire career was built on a foundation of lies, and the sister he'd spent years dismissing would become his only lifeline. The mysterious envelope contained more than just documents. It held academic records, employment verification forms, and correspondence that revealed a conspiracy involving falsified financial credentials, ghost-written business analyses, and investment successes that Marcus had never actually achieved. Every promotion, every accolade, every reason our parents had for considering him the family financial genius was meticulously documented fraud, facilitated by hired consultants who completed his work and covered up through a network of deception that reached into some of the most prestigious financial institutions on Wall Street. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I reveal exactly what was in that envelope and how it led to Marcus sitting in my office 3 months later, asking to work as my assistant for $35,000 a year, let me tell you about the Sunday dinner that started it all, and the moment when I realized that everything I'd believed about my family, my brother, and myself was about to change forever. The weight of carrying this secret alone for the past 3 months has been almost unbearable, but seeing Marcus now, humbled, desperate, and finally understanding what it feels like to be the one looking up instead of down, has given me a perspective on family, success, and justice that I never could have imagined. That Sunday dinner at my parents' sprawling Palo Alto home started with the usual humiliation, this time delivered with surgical precision by my father before I'd even made it through the front door. "Victoria, you're here," he said, not bothering to look up from his Wall Street journal. "I was just telling the Wongs next door about Marcus's latest promotion at Goldman Sachs. When they asked about you, I had to admit I'm still not entirely sure what you actually do for a living. Something with computers in Texas, right?" The familiar sting of his dismissal was nothing new, but my mother's follow-up comment cut even deeper as she adjusted the fresh orchids in their marble foyer. "Oh, darling, don't look so hurt. We're proud of you, in our own way. It's just that when you have one child making millions on Wall Street and another, well, doing whatever it is you do in Austin, it's natural that we focus on the more impressive achievements. Marcus is going to buy us a house in the Hamptons next year." I stood there, still holding the bottle of Dom Perignon I'd brought, a $400 vintage to celebrate what I'd hoped would be a rare moment of family unity, and felt that old childhood sensation of shrinking into invisibility. Here I was, at 36, running a department that generated more revenue than most investment funds, and I was still the disappointing daughter who played with computers while living in some backward Texas city. "I don't understand why you won't move back to California," my mother continued, her voice taking on that condescending tone I knew so well. "There are plenty of little tech companies here where you could find work. Nothing as prestigious as Goldman Sachs, of course, but surely better than whatever startup you're wasting your time with." The fact that Meridian Software Solutions employed over 300 people and had been valued at $800 million in our latest funding round was completely lost on them. In their minds, if it wasn't happening in their immediate social circle, it wasn't worth acknowledging. But what I couldn't have predicted was discovering the leather briefcase that Marcus had carelessly left open on the hallway console table, or the devastating truth that would spill out when I accidentally knocked it over while trying to escape to the powder room after my mother's latest verbal assault. Marcus arrived 30 minutes late, as usual, stepping out of his brand new Porsche 911 Turbo, a gift to himself for his latest bonus at Goldman Sachs. He strode into the house with that familiar swagger, his Tom Ford suit perfectly tailored, his Rolex Submariner catching the light as he gestured enthusiastically about his latest deal. My parents' faces literally transformed when he walked in, lighting up with genuine joy and pride that I'd never seen directed toward me. "There's our Wall Street warrior," my father exclaimed, actually standing up to embrace Marcus, a display of physical affection I couldn't remember receiving since childhood. "Tell us everything about this promotion. The country club is going to be so impressed when they hear." The contrast was devastating. When I called last month to tell them about my promotion to CTO and the TechCrunch article calling me one of the most innovative leaders in artificial intelligence, my mother had responded with, "That's nice, dear." "Oh, did I tell you Marcus was invited to speak at the Stanford Business School alumni dinner?" Even my professional achievements were immediately overshadowed by whatever Marcus was doing, as if my success was somehow less valuable, less real, less worthy of their attention. But what I couldn't have predicted was discovering the leather briefcase that Marcus had carelessly left open on the hallway console table, or the devastating truth that would spill out when I accidentally knocked it over while trying to escape to the powder room after my mother's latest verbal assault. Marcus arrived 30 minutes late, as usual, stepping out of his brand new Porsche 911 Turbo, a gift to himself for his latest bonus at Goldman Sachs. He strode into the house with that familiar swagger, his Tom Ford suit perfectly tailored, his Rolex Submariner catching the light as he gestured enthusiastically about his latest deal. My parents' faces literally transformed when he walked in, lighting up with genuine joy and pride that I'd never seen directed toward me. "There's our Wall Street warrior," my father exclaimed, actually standing up to embrace Marcus, a display of physical affection I couldn't remember receiving since childhood. "Tell us everything about this promotion. The country club is going to be so impressed when they hear." The contrast was devastating. When I'd called last month to tell them about my promotion to CTO and the TechCrunch article calling me one of the most innovative leaders in artificial intelligence, my mother had responded with, "That's nice, dear." "Oh, did I tell you Marcus was invited to speak at the Stanford Business School alumni dinner?" Even my professional achievements were immediately overshadowed by whatever Marcus was doing, as if my success was somehow less valuable, less real, less worthy of their attention. Block 2, Part 2. "Family, I have incredible news," Marcus announced as we gathered in their formal dining room, his voice carrying that same confidence that had charmed professors, clients, and senior partners for years. "Goldman Sachs has offered me the position of managing director in their private wealth management division. The base salary is $1.2 million, plus bonuses that could exceed $3 million annually." My parents erupted in celebration, my mother actually gasping and clutching her pearls like Marcus had just announced he'd been elected president. "1.2 million, she shrieked. "Marcus, you're going to be one of the youngest managing directors in Goldman Sachs history. And at 28. The familiar knot in my stomach tightened as I watched them shower him with praise. My own compensation package, while substantial and including equity that could potentially be worth tens of millions, had never elicited this kind of reaction. When I'd mentioned my salary and stock options, my father had simply nodded and said, "Well, I suppose that's decent for a regional technology company." But then something unexpected happened. As Marcus reached for his champagne flute, my parents had broken out their finest crystal for the occasion. His phone buzzed with what must have been an urgent notification because the color drained from his face instantly. His hand actually trembled as he read whatever message had appeared on his screen, and for a moment, the confident facade cracked completely. "I need to take this call," he said, his voice suddenly tight with anxiety. "It's urgent work stuff. You know how it is in investment banking. Markets never sleep." He stepped out onto the patio, leaving his leather briefcase behind on the sideboard. I could hear fragments of his conversation through the glass doors, phrases like, "I can explain everything, and this is all a misunderstanding," and "You can't do this to me," spoken in a voice I'd never heard from my supremely confident brother before. While my parents continued celebrating in the dining room, discussing how they'd bragged to their friends about their son, the managing director, I accidentally bumped into the console table while heading to the bathroom. Marcus's briefcase tumbled to the floor, its contents scattering across the imported Italian marble, and what I saw in those scattered documents changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Among the papers were emails between Marcus and someone named Finance Guru 2019, detailed invoices for consulting services totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, and most shocking of all, a contract outlining a comprehensive arrangement where this mysterious figure would complete Marcus's financial analyses, create his investment models, and even feed him information through a discreet earpiece during client presentations and board meetings. The central object that would become the key to unraveling everything was a small USB drive, disguised as a luxury pen, that had rolled under the sideboard. My hands shook as I quickly gathered everything together, but not before photographing several of the most damning documents with my phone. This USB drive, I would later discover, contained a complete digital archive of Marcus's deception, every financial model he'd claimed to create but hadn't, every investment strategy he'd presented as his own genius but had actually purchased from ghost consultants. The first suspense breadcrumb hit me like a physical blow as I pocketed the USB drive in a moment of instinct I still can't fully explain. Everything about Marcus's career, everything our parents had built their pride upon, was potentially an elaborate fraud. But what I didn't yet understand was how deep this deception ran, or that the phone call that had drained the color from his face was about to trigger the complete collapse of everything he'd built. When Marcus returned from his phone call 20 minutes later, he looked like a man who'd just received a death sentence. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hunched posture and darting eyes that couldn't meet anyone's gaze directly. His hands shook as he reached for his briefcase, not noticing that the USB drive was missing. It felt like a burning coal in my jacket pocket. "I'm sorry, but I need to leave immediately," he said, his voice lacking any of its usual commanding tone. "There's been a situation at work that requires my immediate attention." My parents' faces fell with disappointment, but they rallied quickly, my mother fussing over him like he was heading off to war. "Of course, darling. Important men like you have important responsibilities. We understand completely." As Marcus hurried out, making excuses about emergency client calls and market volatility, I caught my parents exchanging a look that spoke volumes. It wasn't surprise or concern. It was the look of people who already knew something was terribly wrong but were desperately trying to maintain their facade of pride. The drive back to Austin that night was torture. The USB drive seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in my pocket, and every mile that passed brought me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to discover. But curiosity and years of suppressed resentment won out over caution, and the moment I got home, I plugged that device into my laptop. What I found made me physically sick. The drive contained over 3 years of correspondence between Marcus and a network of financial consultants, academic ghostwriters, and even former Goldman Sachs employees who had been secretly completing his work for enormous fees. Every major deal Marcus had claimed credit for, every innovative investment strategy that had earned him promotions, every presentation that had impressed senior partners, all of it had been purchased, plagiarized, or ghostwritten by others. But the most devastating discovery was a folder labeled Family Investment that contained detailed financial records showing how Marcus had been funding this elaborate deception. The money wasn't coming from his Goldman Sachs salary. It was coming from a systematic embezzlement scheme involving my father's accounting firm. Client funds were being funneled through a complex web of shell companies to pay for Marcus's army of ghost consultants, with both my father and Marcus fully aware of the fraud they were committing. The second suspense breadcrumb hit me when I found email chains discussing me specifically. Marcus had actually hired consultants to research my company and my achievements, not to celebrate them, but to systematically undermine them in conversations with our parents. There were detailed reports about how to downplay my success, scripts for dismissing my accomplishments, and even suggestions for steering family conversations away from my career whenever I brought it up. They had been actively working to make me feel inferior, to maintain the illusion that Marcus was the family success story, while I was just the disappointing daughter who played with computers. The manipulation was so calculated, so cruel, that I spent the entire night alternating between rage and tears. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next morning. My phone rang at 6 a.m., Marcus calling from what sounded like a bathroom, his voice cracking with panic. "Victoria, I need your help," he whispered, the desperation so raw it was almost painful to hear. "Something terrible has happened. Goldman Sachs has suspended me pending investigation. They're saying there are irregularities in my work product, questions about the authenticity of my financial models." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being dismissed and belittled, I was suddenly the sister he needed. But I wasn't ready to reveal what I knew yet. I needed to understand the full scope of their deception first. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "They're claiming that some of my analysis work shows patterns consistent with multiple authors, that my presentation styles vary too dramatically between projects. Victoria, they have forensic accountants going through everything. If they find out about..." He stopped himself, but the implication was clear. Over the next 48 hours, the situation escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into Marcus's trading patterns. Goldman Sachs not only fired him but also flagged his activities to financial regulatory authorities. Worse yet, the investigation had expanded to include my father's accounting firm after suspicious money transfers were discovered. The third suspense breadcrumb came when I realized that the phone call Marcus had received during dinner wasn't from Goldman Sachs. It was from one of his ghost consultants, warning him that a disgruntled former employee was threatening to expose their entire operation unless Marcus paid him an additional $2 million in hush money. What Marcus didn't know was that this former employee had already gone to the authorities. The investigation that was destroying his career had been triggered not by Goldman Sachs discovering inconsistencies in his work, but by a whistleblower who had provided federal investigators with detailed evidence of the ghostwriting operation, the embezzlement scheme, and the systematic fraud that had built Marcus's entire career. As I sat in my Austin office, watching the news reports about a major financial fraud investigation involving a prominent Bay Area accounting firm and a Goldman Sachs vice president, I realized that everything was about to come crashing down. The USB drive in my desk drawer contained evidence that could either destroy my family completely or give me the power to control how this story ended. Little did Marcus know that when he called me begging for help, he was talking to the one person who possessed the complete truth about his deception. And what he definitely didn't know was that I had already made a decision about what I was going to do with that truth. A decision that would transform me from the family disappointment into the only person who could save them from complete destruction, but only on my terms. The golden boy who had never needed anything from anyone was about to learn what it felt like to be completely dependent on the sister he'd spent decades dismissing. And I was about to discover just how satisfying justice could be when served with patience and precision. The complications escalated faster than I could have imagined. By Thursday morning, federal agents had raided my father's accounting firm, seizing computers, files, and financial records dating back 5 years. The local San Francisco news was running stories about alleged embezzlement and money laundering involving millions in client funds, and our family name was being dragged through the mud in ways that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. Marcus called me 17 times that day, each call more desperate than the last. His voice had taken on a quality I'd never heard before, raw terror mixed with the kind of panic that comes from watching your entire world collapse in real time. Goldman Sachs had not only terminated him but had also frozen his accounts pending the federal investigation. His Porsche had been repossessed, his credit cards canceled, and his exclusive Upper East Side apartment was about to be seized as part of the asset forfeiture process. "Victoria, please, I'm begging you," he sobbed during his final call of the day. "I know we haven't always been close, but you're my sister. You're the only family member who isn't under investigation. I need somewhere to stay, just temporarily, until I can figure this out." The irony was almost too perfect. The brother who had spent decades treating me like an embarrassing afterthought was now pleading for sanctuary from the sister whose success he'd systematically tried to undermine. But I still wasn't ready to show my hand. I needed to see how much deeper this rabbit hole went. "Marcus, I don't understand what's happening," I lied smoothly. "The news reports are saying something about ghost writers and embezzlement. Surely, there's been some mistake." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Victoria, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you won't judge me. I've made some mistakes, some compromises that seemed small at the time, but have gotten completely out of control." What followed was the most pathetic confession I'd ever heard. Marcus admitted to hiring consultants to help with his work, though he carefully downplayed the extent of it, making it sound like he'd occasionally gotten help with research rather than having his entire career ghostwritten. He admitted that Dad had helped him with some financial arrangements, but painted it as family support rather than systematic embezzlement of client funds. But what he didn't confess to, what he couldn't know I already knew, was the deliberate campaign to undermine my achievements, the calculated manipulation of our parents' perceptions, and the sheer scope of the fraud that had built his golden reputation. The fourth suspense breadcrumb hit me when Marcus let slip something that chilled me to the bone. The worst part is, they're not just investigating the financial stuff. They found communications suggesting I was involved in discrediting competitors and manipulating family relationships to maintain my image. Victoria, if they prove I was actively sabotaging other people's careers, including family members, this goes from financial fraud to something much worse. He had no idea he was confessing to me directly, admitting that he'd been actively working to damage my reputation and diminish my success in our parents' eyes. The sister he was now begging for help was the same person he'd been systematically destroying for years. By Friday, the situation had become a full-blown crisis. My mother called me in hysterics, barely coherent through her tears. "Victoria, they've frozen all our accounts. The FBI says we can't access any of our money while they investigate where it came from. Your father's partners are talking about dissolving the firm and suing us personally for damages." The Chen family empire was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. Dad's accounting firm, built over 30 years of careful reputation management, was facing bankruptcy and criminal charges. The Palo Alto house was under federal lien. Even their country club membership had been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. But the most delicious irony came when my mother, in her desperation, accidentally revealed the truth about how they'd really viewed my success all these years. "Victoria, you have to help us," she pleaded. "You're the only one with clean money, the only one who built something legitimate. We always knew your little computer company was doing well, but we never realized how successful you really were." Marcus kept telling us it wasn't that impressive, that Texas companies didn't count the same way as real businesses. There it was, confirmation that Marcus had been actively poisoning my parents' perception of my accomplishments, ensuring that my success never threatened his position as the family golden child. Even in their moment of crisis, they were admitting that they'd been manipulated into dismissing my achievements. The pressure on Marcus intensified when his former ghost consultants began cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for immunity deals. Each new revelation painted a picture of fraud so extensive and systematic that even I was shocked by the scope of it. Marcus hadn't just cheated on a few projects. He had literally never completed a single piece of legitimate work in his entire career at Goldman Sachs. The breaking point came when the FBI discovered that Marcus had been planning to frame me for some of the financial irregularities. Among the evidence seized from his apartment were draft emails designed to make it look like I had been involved in the embezzlement scheme, using my technology expertise to help hide the money trail. He had been preparing to sacrifice his own sister to save himself, even as he was begging me for help. When I learned about this betrayal, this final, unforgivable act of selfishness, I knew it was time to reveal what I really knew. The USB drive in my desk contained evidence that could completely destroy Marcus, but it also contained information that could be used strategically to control the narrative and protect the family members who deserved protection. The fourth suspense breadcrumb completed itself when I realized that Marcus's call asking to stay with me wasn't just about having a place to live. It was about gaining access to my computers and financial systems so he could potentially implicate me in his crimes. The brother who had spent decades undermining me was now planning to destroy me completely to save himself. But what Marcus didn't know was that I had been documenting everything, building my own case file, and preparing for a confrontation that would finally settle the score between us once and for all. The sister he had dismissed and betrayed was about to become his judge, jury, and the architect of his ultimate fate. The golden boy's fall from grace was accelerating, and I was the only person who could determine whether he landed softly or crashed completely. But first, he would have to face the truth about what he had done to me and what I was prepared to do to him in return. The major setback came on a gray Monday morning when I received a call that made my blood run cold. It wasn't from Marcus this time. It was from Special Agent Jennifer Morrison of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and she was calling about me. "Miss Chen, we need to schedule an interview regarding your potential involvement in the financial irregularities surrounding your brother Marcus Chen and your father's accounting firm," she said in a tone that was professionally polite but unmistakably serious. "We've discovered some concerning digital communications that suggest you may have provided technical assistance in concealing financial transactions." My heart stopped. Marcus had actually done it. He'd found a way to implicate me in his crimes. Somehow, despite being under federal investigation and having his every move monitored, he had managed to plant evidence suggesting that I was complicit in the embezzlement scheme. The USB drive in my desk suddenly felt like a ticking time bomb, and I realized that my position as an observer in this drama was about to change dramatically. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I work in artificial intelligence software development. I have no involvement in financial services or my father's accounting business." "That may be true, Miss Chen, but we have emails and financial records suggesting that your company's systems were used to process some of the questionable transactions. We also have communications indicating that you were aware of irregular financial activities involving your family members. We'll need to discuss this in detail." After hanging up, I sat in my office staring out at the Austin skyline, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. Everything I had worked for, my company, my reputation, my career, was suddenly at risk because of Marcus's desperate attempt to drag me down with him. The brother who had been begging for my help just days earlier had decided that destroying me was preferable to facing the consequences of his own actions alone. But the real blow came when I discovered how he had done it. Marcus had hired a cybersecurity firm to create fake digital evidence suggesting that Meridian servers had been used to process offshore transactions related to the embezzlement scheme. Using his knowledge of my company's systems, information he'd gathered during our phone conversations when he was pretending to ask for my help, he had constructed a plausible narrative that I was the technical mastermind behind the money laundering operation. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated enough to fool federal investigators, at least initially. Fake server logs, manufactured email chains, and forged digital signatures all pointed to my involvement in crimes I had never committed. Marcus had used his network of consultants, the same people who had been ghostwriting his financial work, to create a cybercrime cover-up that would shift blame away from him and onto me. The fifth suspense breadcrumb revealed itself when I realized that this wasn't just about saving himself. Marcus had planned this betrayal from the moment the investigation began. While he was calling me and crying about needing help, he was simultaneously working with criminal consultants to frame me for his crimes. The desperation in his voice hadn't been about losing his career. It had been about the pressure of orchestrating my destruction while pretending to be my victim. The darkest moment came when I discovered that my own parents had been told about the fabricated evidence and had actually believed it. My mother called me that evening, her voice cold and accusatory in a way I'd never heard before. "Victoria, how could you do this to your own family?" she demanded. "The FBI showed us emails proving that you helped Marcus and your father hide the stolen money. All these years, we thought you were just unsuccessful, but you were actually a criminal using your computer skills to help destroy our family." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I actually laughed, a bitter, hysterical sound that seemed to come from someone else entirely. Even when presented with obvious fabricated evidence designed to frame their daughter, my parents chose to believe that I was the villain rather than question whether their golden son might be capable of such elaborate deception. "Mom, think about this logically," I tried to explain. "Why would I risk everything I've built to help with a scheme that benefits Marcus? What possible motive would I have?" "Money, obviously," she replied without hesitation. "You've always been jealous of Marcus's success. Maybe you thought if you helped him, you could finally be part of something important instead of just running that little company in Texas. The casual cruelty of her assumption that I would commit federal crimes just to feel important cut deeper than any of Marcus's manipulations. My own mother genuinely believed that I was so desperate for relevance that I would destroy my legitimate success to participate in someone else's fraud. That night, sitting alone in my Austin home with federal agents preparing to tear apart my life and my own family convinced of my guilt, I reached the absolute lowest point of this entire ordeal. Everything I had worked for seemed lost, and the brother I had been secretly trying to help, or at least not completely destroy, had repaid my discretion by attempting to frame me for his crimes. But it was in that darkest moment that I finally understood what I had to do. The USB drive in my desk wasn't just evidence of Marcus's guilt, it was proof of my innocence. The detailed records of his ghostwriting operation, the timestamps showing when his fake work was actually created, the financial trail proving that the embezzlement was entirely separate from my company's operations, all of it would exonerate me while simultaneously destroying him. The fifth suspense breadcrumb completed itself when I realized that Marcus's attempt to frame me had been his fatal mistake. In trying to implicate me, he had forced me to reveal the full extent of his deception. The sister he had been manipulating and betraying was about to become his nemesis, armed with evidence that would not only clear her name but ensure that his punishment would be far more severe than if he had simply accepted responsibility for his own crimes. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated in his desperate gamble to save himself, was that I had been building my own case file from the moment I found that USB drive. Every phone call, every confession, every attempt to manipulate me had been documented and recorded. The brother who thought he was using me as a scapegoat was about to discover that he had actually been building the case for his own complete destruction. The Golden Boy's darkest hour was about to become my moment of ultimate vindication, and this time, there would be no coming back from the fall. The turning point came when I realized that playing defense wasn't enough. I needed to go on the offensive. That Tuesday morning, instead of waiting for the FBI interview that would tear apart my life based on Marcus's fabricated evidence, I called Special Agent Morrison myself and requested an immediate meeting. It was time to reveal what I really knew, and more importantly, what I could prove. Agent Morrison, I need to speak with you urgently about the Chen family investigation, I said, my voice steady with a confidence I hadn't felt in days. I have evidence that will not only clear my name but also expose the full scope of the fraud you're investigating. However, I need guarantees about immunity and protection before I share what I know. The silence on the other end of the line told me she was intrigued. Miss Chen, are you saying you have information that could assist in our investigation? I'm saying I have a complete digital archive of every crime Marcus Chen has committed, including evidence that the materials you have implicating me are fabricated as part of his attempt to frame his own sister. But more than that, I have proof of systematic fraud going back years, involving multiple financial institutions and a network of criminal consultants. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a conference room at the FBI field office in Austin with Agent Morrison, 2 federal prosecutors, and a digital forensics expert examining the contents of the USB drive that had been burning a hole in my desk for weeks. As they scrolled through the evidence, the ghostwriting contracts, the embezzlement records, the emails discussing my systematic character assassination, and most damning of all, the recent communications planning my frame-up, I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to amazement to outright anger. Ms. Chen, how long have you had this evidence? Agent Morrison asked, her voice tight, with controlled fury. I discovered it 3 weeks ago, completely by accident. I've been trying to decide what to do with it, but when Marcus attempted to frame me for his crimes, that decision became very easy. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, leaned forward intently. This evidence doesn't just exonerate you, it proves that Marcus Chen has been operating one of the most sophisticated white-collar fraud schemes we've ever encountered. The systematic nature of this deception, the multiple victims, the interstate commerce violations, we're looking at potential sentences of 25 to 30 years. But the most satisfying moment came when the digital forensics expert confirmed what I had suspected. The evidence Marcus had planted to implicate me was so clumsily fabricated that it actually proved his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The timestamps were wrong, the server logs were inconsistent, and the digital signatures were forged using techniques that could be traced directly back to the cybersecurity firm Marcus had hired. "Your brother isn't just a fraud, Miss Chen. He's a remarkably stupid criminal," the expert said with barely concealed contempt. "These fake files are like digital fingerprints leading directly back to him. He's essentially created a complete confession while trying to frame you. Agent Morrison offered me a deal that was better than I could have hoped for. Complete immunity in exchange for my cooperation, protection from any retaliation, and the guarantee that my company would be cleared of any wrongdoing." But the sweetest part was her next question. "Miss Chen, would you be willing to participate in a controlled conversation with your brother? We'd like to record him confessing to the frame-up attempt." The setup was perfect. I called Marcus from the FBI office, with federal agents listening to every word, and told him that I had been contacted by investigators, but that I was willing to help him if he would finally tell me the complete truth about what had happened. "Victoria, thank God you're willing to listen," Marcus said, his voice heavy with relief. "I know some evidence has surfaced that makes it look like you were involved, but I can explain everything. I had to create some documentation that would shift attention away from the family. I never meant for it to actually hurt you." "What kind of documentation, Marcus?" I asked, following the script the prosecutors had given me. "Just some digital files that made it look like your company had processed some of the transactions. Nothing that would actually stick, just enough to buy me time to figure out how to fix this mess. You have to understand, I was desperate. I thought if I could just muddy the waters enough, maybe we could all get through this." Every word was being recorded, every confession was being documented, and Marcus had no idea that he was sealing his own fate while thinking he was manipulating his sister one final time. The brother who had spent years undermining my success was now personally constructing the evidence that would destroy him completely. But the most beautiful moment came when he made the mistake of revealing the full scope of his contempt for me. "Victoria, you have to understand, this was never really about you. I've been managing our parents' perception of your little company for years, making sure they didn't get confused about which of us was actually successful. I never thought you'd actually become a problem that needed to be solved." The sixth suspense breadcrumb completed itself as I realized that this recorded confession wouldn't just send Marcus to prison, it would also vindicate me in the eyes of our parents, who would finally understand that their golden son had been manipulating them for years while systematically destroying their daughter's reputation. When the call ended, Agent Morrison looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Miss Chen, in 20 years of investigating white-collar crime, I've never seen a suspect incriminate himself so thoroughly. Your brother just confessed to fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and attempted frame-up of a federal witness. He's going to prison for the rest of his productive life." As I drove back to my office that afternoon, I felt a sense of power and control that I had never experienced before. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession was recorded, and the federal government was now working with me rather than against me. Marcus's attempt to destroy me had backfired so spectacularly that it would actually make my eventual vindication even more dramatic and satisfying. But I wasn't finished yet. The final phase of my plan involved something that would be even more devastating to Marcus than federal prison: public humiliation in front of the family and social circle that had worshipped him for so long. The golden boy who had built his identity on being superior to his sister was about to learn what it felt like to be completely and utterly exposed as a fraud. What Marcus didn't know was that I had already arranged for the perfect stage for his final downfall, a family gathering where the truth would come out in the most dramatic and irreversible way possible. The sister he had dismissed and betrayed was about to orchestrate the most complete and public destruction of his reputation that anyone could imagine. The climax came exactly 3 weeks later, at what was supposed to be a private family meeting to discuss Marcus's legal situation. I had suggested we gather at my parents' house, the same dining room where Marcus had announced his fake promotion just months earlier, ostensibly to coordinate our family's response to the ongoing investigation. What Marcus didn't know was that I had invited several other people to join us: Agent Morrison, Prosecutor Catherine Walsh, and most importantly, the three family friends whose children had been Marcus's biggest competitors throughout school. The Wongs, the Lees, and the Patels, the same families who had spent decades hearing about Marcus's superiority over their own accomplished children, were all present under the pretense of offering support during our difficult time. In reality, they were about to witness the most complete and devastating exposure of fraud in our social circle's history. Marcus arrived 30 minutes late, looking haggard and desperate in clothes that were clearly borrowed. His designer wardrobe had been seized as part of the asset forfeiture. He'd been staying in a budget motel since being evicted from his apartment, and the contrast with his former golden boy appearance was stark and humiliating. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the head of the table where Marcus had once announced his fake achievements. "I know this has been a difficult time for our family, but I think it's important that everyone understands the complete truth about what's been happening." I pulled out a thick folder of documents, printed copies of everything from the USB drive, and placed it on the table. Marcus's face went white as he recognized what he was seeing. "Marcus, for 28 years, our family has celebrated your achievements. You were the genius, the success story, the son who would bring honor to the Chen name. But everything, and I mean everything, about your academic and professional accomplishments has been a lie." The room fell completely silent as I began reading from the ghostwriting contracts. "This is an agreement between Marcus Chen and Academic Genius LLC for the complete writing of his Stanford MBA thesis at a cost of $50,000. This is a contract with Finance Pro Solutions for the creation of all financial models attributed to Marcus during his first 2 years at Goldman Sachs at a cost of $200,000. I watched the faces of our family friends as the scope of the deception became clear. Mrs. Wong's expression shifted from confusion to horror to barely controlled rage as she realized that her son David, who had legitimately earned his Harvard MBA through years of hard work, had been unfavorably compared to a complete fraud for his entire adult life. But the first major revelation was still to come. The money to pay for this elaborate deception didn't come from Marcus's salary. I continued, pulling out the embezzlement records. It came from systematic theft of client funds from Dad's accounting firm, with Dad's full knowledge and participation. My father, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly found his voice. "Victoria, how dare you air our family's private business in front of—" "Our private business?" I interrupted, my voice rising with years of suppressed anger. "Dad, you and Marcus stole over $3 million from your clients to fund his fake career, and then you both tried to frame me for your crimes when the FBI started investigating. This stopped being a private family matter the moment you decided to destroy your daughter to protect your fraud of a son." The room fell completely silent as I began reading from the ghostwriting contracts. "This is an agreement between Marcus Chen and Academic Genius LLC for the complete writing of his Stanford MBA thesis at a cost of $50,000. This is a contract with Finance Pro Solutions for the creation of all financial models attributed to Marcus during his first 2 years at Goldman Sachs at a cost of $200,000. I watched the faces of our family friends as the scope of the deception became clear. Mrs. Wong's expression shifted from confusion to horror to barely controlled rage as she realized that her son David, who had legitimately earned his Harvard MBA through years of hard work, had been unfavorably compared to a complete fraud for his entire adult life. But the first major revelation was still to come. The money to pay for this elaborate deception didn't come from Marcus's salary. I continued, pulling out the embezzlement records. It came from systematic theft of client funds from Dad's accounting firm, with Dad's full knowledge and participation. My father, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly found his voice. "Victoria, how dare you air our family's private business in front of—" "Our private business?" I interrupted, my voice rising with years of suppressed anger. "Dad, you and Marcus stole over $3 million from your clients to fund his fake career, and then you both tried to frame me for your crimes when the FBI started investigating. This stopped being a private family matter the moment you decided to destroy your daughter to protect your fraud of a son." Block 7, Part 2. The second layer of revelation came when I played the recorded phone call of Marcus confessing to fabricating evidence against me. As his voice filled the room, admitting to creating fake digital files to implicate his own sister in federal crimes, I watched our family friends' expressions shift from shock to disgust. "You tried to send your own sister to prison to save yourself?" Mrs. Lee asked, her voice filled with revulsion. Victoria, who has built a legitimate, successful company through her own hard work? But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I pulled out the emails documenting Marcus's systematic campaign to undermine my achievements in our parents' eyes. This is a communication between Marcus and one of his consultants, discussing strategies to minimize my professional accomplishments during family gatherings. I read aloud. Quote, "Make sure parents understand that regional tech companies don't count as real success. Emphasize that Victoria's patents are just computer stuff, not meaningful like finance work. If she mentions revenue figures, redirect conversation to my latest deal." The silence in the room was deafening. My mother, who had spent years dismissing my achievements based on Marcus's manipulation, looked like she might be physically sick. "There's more," I continued relentlessly. "Here's an email where Marcus discusses hiring researchers to investigate my company specifically to find weaknesses to exploit in family conversations. And here's one where he celebrates successfully convincing you, Mom, that my TechCrunch feature was just a local business magazine article." The third layer of revelation came when Agent Morrison stood up and addressed the room directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Morrison with the FBI. I'm here to inform you that Marcus Chen is under federal indictment for wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and attempted framing of a federal witness. The evidence Ms. Victoria Chen provided to our investigation has resulted in charges that carry a potential sentence of 30 years in federal prison." Mr. Patel, whose son had always been compared unfavorably to Marcus, stood up slowly. 30 years, he asked, his voice barely containing his satisfaction. "For the boy who was supposedly smarter than all our children?" But the moment of ultimate vindication came when my mother finally spoke, her voice shaking with emotion. "Victoria, I owe you an apology that I can never fully express. We treated you terribly, dismissed your real achievements, and believed lies about your character. You built something genuine and successful while we were celebrating a fraud." The harsh phrase that completed Marcus's humiliation came from my father, delivered with a coldness that made everyone in the room flinch. "Marcus, you are not my son anymore. You are a criminal who destroyed our family's reputation and tried to frame your own sister for your crimes. You are the biggest disappointment and disgrace in the history of the Chen family name." The public recognition of my vindication was immediate and complete. Mrs. Wang turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Victoria, we owe you an apology too. We've spent years hearing about Marcus's superiority, never realizing that you were the Chen child who actually deserved our admiration and respect." As federal agents placed Marcus in handcuffs, the arrest warrant had been timed to coincide with this gathering. I felt a satisfaction so profound that it almost took my breath away. The golden boy who had manipulated, undermined, and betrayed me was being led away in chains while our entire social circle finally understood who had been the real success story all along. The brother who had spent decades making me feel invisible was now the one disappearing, while I stood vindicated, respected, and finally recognized for the achievements that had always been real. 3 months later, as I sit in my corner office looking out at the Austin skyline, the transformation in my life still feels surreal. Marcus is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in California, facing 28 years behind bars after pleading guilty to 17 felony counts. His fall from grace was so complete and so public that it made national news. The Stanford MBA and Goldman Sachs vice president, whose entire career was revealed to be an elaborate fraud. The aftermath of that devastating family meeting rippled through our social circles in ways I never could have anticipated. The Wangs, Lees, and Patels didn't just apologize to me. They became some of my strongest advocates, spreading the true story of my accomplishments throughout their networks. Within weeks, I was being invited to speak at Stanford Business School, featured in Forbes as an example of authentic leadership, and approached by venture capital firms wanting to invest in Meridian's expansion. My parents' attempts at reconciliation have been complicated. Dad's accounting firm was dissolved and he's facing his own criminal charges, though his cooperation with the investigation will likely result in a much lighter sentence than Marcus received. Mom has tried to rebuild our relationship, but the years of systematic dismissal and the discovery of how deeply she believed Marcus's lies about me have created wounds that may never fully heal. "Victoria, can you ever forgive us?" she asked during one of our awkward monthly phone calls. "We were so foolish, so easily manipulated. You were building something real and important while we were celebrating a house of cards." The professional vindication has been extraordinary. Meridian Software Solutions has grown from a successful regional company to a nationally recognized leader in artificial intelligence. We've opened offices in San Francisco and New York. Our valuation has increased to over $2 billion, and I've been named one of Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 technology leaders. The patents I developed, the ones my parents used to dismiss as computer stuff, are now licensing for millions of dollars annually to major tech companies. But perhaps the most satisfying change has been in how I'm perceived within our family's social circle. At the recent Stanford Alumni Association dinner, the same event where Marcus used to be the celebrated speaker, I was the keynote presenter, discussing authentic leadership and the importance of building success on genuine achievement rather than manipulation and fraud. The epilogue to Marcus's story is both pathetic and fitting. He writes to me occasionally from prison, letters that alternate between desperate apologies and attempts to blame others for his situation. His most recent letter actually had the audacity to suggest that I should use my success to help fund his legal appeals, as if the sister he tried to frame for federal crimes owed him some kind of familial loyalty. 3 months later, as I sit in my corner office looking out at the Austin skyline, the transformation in my life still feels surreal. Marcus is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility in California, facing 28 years behind bars after pleading guilty to 17 felony counts. His fall from grace was so complete and so public that it made national news. The Stanford MBA and Goldman Sachs vice president, whose entire career was revealed to be an elaborate fraud. The aftermath of that devastating family meeting rippled through our social circles in ways I never could have anticipated. The Wongs, Lees, and Patels didn't just apologize to me. They became some of my strongest advocates, spreading the true story of my accomplishments throughout their networks. Within weeks, I was being invited to speak at Stanford Business School, featured in Forbes as an example of authentic leadership, and approached by venture capital firms wanting to invest in Meridian's expansion. My parents' attempts at reconciliation have been complicated. Dad's accounting firm was dissolved and he's facing his own criminal charges, though his cooperation with the investigation will likely result in a much lighter sentence than Marcus received. Mom has tried to rebuild our relationship, but the years of systematic dismissal and the discovery of how deeply she believed Marcus's lies about me have created wounds that may never fully heal. "Victoria, can you ever forgive us?" she asked during one of our awkward monthly phone calls. "We were so foolish, so easily manipulated. You were building something real and important while we were celebrating a house of cards." The professional vindication has been extraordinary. Meridian Software Solutions has grown from a successful regional company to a nationally recognized leader in artificial intelligence. We've opened offices in San Francisco and New York. Our valuation has increased to over $2 billion, and I've been named one of Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 technology leaders. The patents I developed, the ones my parents used to dismiss as computer stuff, are now licensing for millions of dollars annually to major tech companies. But perhaps the most satisfying change has been in how I'm perceived within our family's social circle. At the recent Stanford Alumni Association dinner, the same event where Marcus used to be the celebrated speaker, I was the keynote presenter, discussing authentic leadership and the importance of building success on genuine achievement rather than manipulation and fraud. The epilogue to Marcus's story is both pathetic and fitting. He writes to me occasionally from prison, letters that alternate between desperate apologies and attempts to blame others for his situation. His most recent letter actually had the audacity to suggest that I should use my success to help fund his legal appeals, as if the sister he tried to frame for federal crimes owed him some kind of familial loyalty. Block 8, Part 2. The final call to action in this story comes from a conversation I had just last week with a young woman who reminded me so much of my former self. She approached me after a conference presentation, tears in her eyes, and told me about her own family situation, a brother whose achievements always overshadowed hers, parents who consistently dismissed her accomplishments, and a growing suspicion that the comparisons weren't entirely fair. "How did you survive it?" she asked. "How did you keep believing in yourself when your own family made you feel invisible?" My answer surprised even me. I survived it by focusing on building something real, something that couldn't be taken away or diminished by other people's opinions. And when the truth finally came out, it was so much more powerful because I had genuine achievements to contrast with their lies. The woman who sits in my office today, the sister Marcus now begs for help, is fundamentally different from the one who attended that Sunday dinner 6 months ago. I'm no longer seeking validation from people who were never capable of seeing my worth. I'm no longer invisible in my own family story. And I'm certainly no longer the disappointing daughter who just plays with computers. Marcus calls collect from prison every few weeks, still trying to manipulate me, still believing that our childhood dynamic gives him some claim on my loyalty or resources. His most recent call was perhaps the most telling. "Victoria, you won. You destroyed me completely. Isn't that enough? Can't you help me now?" What he still doesn't understand is that I didn't destroy him. He destroyed himself through years of fraud, manipulation, and betrayal. I simply revealed the truth and protected myself when he tried to frame me for his crimes. The sister he dismissed and undermined didn't seek revenge. I simply stopped enabling his deception and allowed natural consequences to unfold. The position he applied for 3 months ago, my assistant, for $35,000 a year, remains unfilled. Not because I'm waiting for him, but because I realized that even offering him employment would be an act of misplaced charity that he doesn't deserve and hasn't earned. As I finish writing the story, I'm preparing for tomorrow's board meeting where we'll be announcing Meridian's acquisition of a major Silicon Valley firm. Ironically, one of the companies that used to reject my applications because they preferred candidates with more prestigious backgrounds like Goldman Sachs experience. The question I want to leave you with is this. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was systematically undermining your success while pretending to support you? And if so, how did you handle the balance between justice and family loyalty when the truth finally came to light? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, because while my story has reached its conclusion, I've learned that these dynamics of family manipulation and professional deception are far more common than any of us want to believe.